And I just had this attitude that wasn't, oh, it's all going to be fine. I still had fear. I was still worried. I was still very aware that this, in theory, might not work out. Hypothetically, this might not work out. But I just had this attitude of, I'll make it work. I want to welcome you to Identity Evolution, the podcast where we explore the moments that shape who we become. I'm your host, Lorena Schuth, somatic self-concept and identity coach, and I'm here to guide you through the raw and the real and the transformative stories of reinvention. Hello, my loves. In today's episode, we are going to talk about taking a leap of faith when you don't have backup, and essentially leading with faith instead of with fear. So I wanted to address this by really sharing some personal stories of when I've done that in my life and what that process really looked like, because one of my friends said to me recently, and this was kind of the inspiration for this podcast episode or the solo episode. She said to me, what I admire about you, Lorena, is that when you set yourself a goal, you just do it. She said, there are so many people who would still be talking about the things they want to do, but when you tell me you want something, then you just end up doing it. And to an extent, that's always been something that's been inside of me. I knew when I was 13 that I didn't want to stay in my home country. Sorry, Mom. Sorry, Dad. And I know so many people who have desires that they don't go for out of some sort of fear. Maybe it's a fear of judgment. Maybe it's a fear of the unknown. Maybe it's a fear of loss. But what I want to show you through today's episode is, first of all, what magic can come out of taking a leap of faith. And that choosing faith over fear doesn't mean that you have no fear. Choosing faith does not mean that you don't feel fear. It just means that you don't let it hold you back. It means you're taking action instead of staying frozen. Because if you're afraid of what may go wrong or that it maybe won't work out, let me tell you, the only guarantee you have that you will fail is if you don't try. So I have a million examples of when I've done this in my life, in big ways and in small ways. But today I'm going to share about 3 instances in my life where I took the steps that really put me in a position of risk, but that ended up really paying off. And without taking any of the steps I'm going to share with you today, I would not be where I am today. I would not be sitting here in front of you, and you would not be listening to this episode or watching this episode. So I also want to give a caveat here to say that this doesn't mean, any of what I'm sharing today doesn't mean that you should take this as inspiration to immediately quit your job without backup. Every circumstance, every situation is incredibly unique, and this is more about trusting your intuition and trusting yourself when you feel the pull towards something or when you feel like something will expand you, rather than staying in what's safe and familiar. That's more what it's about. It's not about being irresponsible. Okay, I want to give that as a little caveat as well, because I think often there can also be stories of, I quit my job and then I came into a lot of money, or I did this, whatever the story is. I can't even think of examples at the moment, but this isn't about being irresponsible. It's about trusting your intuition and letting your heart and what your body tells you lead more than what your mind tries to talk you out of. So my favorite story, and that's how I ended up living where I live now, which is Scotland, was when I moved to Edinburgh, the city where I live, with nothing lined up. So I had done my master's degree in Scotland, in Edinburgh, and after that, I moved to London for a year because I hadn't been able to find a job here in Edinburgh, and I had wanted to stay actually, but it just didn't work out that way. And so I moved to London, took a job in London, and I honestly really, really didn't like living in London. The job was also hard work and, to be honest, not a lot of pay, to be diplomatic about this. It had a very, very long notice period as well, and I kept feeling the pull to move back to Scotland. I felt it all year that I lived in London. I went back to visit as often as I could, and I kept feeling like I wanted to go back to Scotland. So I quit my job in London, and I had nothing lined up. I didn't have a job up in Scotland. This was also, I will say that too, this was the year Brexit happened. So everything was very uncertain whether I wasn't even sure whether I could stay in the UK. And quitting my job was then a risk as well, because what if then I don't find a job in the UK and then I have to go back to my home country, although that's not where I want to be. And yeah, I didn't have a job lined up. I also didn't have a place to live lined up. And if you know anything about the rental situation in the UK, if you don't have a job, you're not going to get a home. You need a job to get a home. It's like almost everywhere, right? You need a job to get a home. You need a home to get a job. It's that weird paradox, but let's not get into the topic of homelessness. It's a different topic, but I kept feeling the pull to move to Scotland, and I trusted it. And because I had such a long notice period, I really didn't have another choice. I was like, either I quit or, I might not be able to find something given how long my notice period is. And I just had this attitude that wasn't, oh, it's all going to be fine. I still had fear. I was still worried. I was still very aware that this, in theory, might not work out. Hypothetically, this might not work out. But I just had this attitude of, I'll make it work. If I'm homeless, if I'm jobless, I'll figure it out. I can be resourceful. I can work, a very minimum pay job. Maybe I can stay with friends. Maybe I can live in a hostel for some time. I just really had no attachment to the actual outcome. I just didn't allow a plan B to enter my consciousness. I just didn't allow myself to settle for less than the journey that I wanted to walk. I didn't know the outcome, but I knew what steps felt right to take. And I think that is the important lesson here. I didn't know where it would lead. I didn't know whether it would work out, but I knew what I had to do. I knew that I should do everything in my power to be able to go back to Scotland, because that's where my heart was leading me and pulling me. And I don't regret it at all, because it worked out so much better than I could have anticipated. In fact, I found a home, although I didn't have a job. Unheard of. I found that pretty quickly as well. It aligned in such a divine way. I didn't have a job up until the point I landed in Edinburgh, or I flew back to Edinburgh. And that day or that week, I got multiple job offers. So at that point, I could even choose. It just all worked out so perfectly. And a year later, I manifested my dream job. And a couple years after that, I started my business and I bought a home. And now I'm really settled and rooted here. And I couldn't be happier about it. None of this would have happened if I'd played it safe. I'm convinced of that. Yeah, so that is that example. Another thing that I did, and I did that multiple times, was to make investments in myself that were scary at the time. So there are in particular 3 big investments that I made, and I made them in the worst possible time, but also the most important time. I've invested a lot in myself in general, and that's not something that I ever hesitate on, really, because I know it's the most important thing. It's more important than anything I could invest my money into. But in the beginning, investing in coaching in particular felt so foreign. I remember investing in a coach. My first coach I invested into she had a donation-based offer, and it was so edgy for me. And the amount I paid to her was like $400 for the whole month. It was nothing. But, it had been a scary idea for me at the time. And now the 3 biggest investments that I've made, and most important investments that I've made, I all made in the most precarious situations. The first one was when I was deep in heartbreak and I really needed someone to support me through that. And I hired someone, actually, I interviewed her, who was my mentor at the time, who helped me heal through this heartbreak, here on this podcast in season 1. So I will link that interview for you as well. And that was so necessary. That was not in a time where I was in financial abundance by any means. And in fact, I was working a bit less, and I was in a very depressed is maybe a bit of a strong word, but I was heartbroken. I was in a heartbroken place, and I just knew how important it was to get help. I do that every time I know I need to get help. I did that when my cat passed away, and not this one. She's still here. But, oh, sorry, baby. Oh, God, she's so cute. I love you. Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you. This is Elsa. She's alive and well. But before her, I had a cat named Otis, and he passed away, sadly. And I was in such a deep grief portal, so I hired a grief therapist at the time as well. And then the second really big investment that I made, for me, big investment, was where I really invested into healing my trauma. And I had no money left in the bank after that. And it was also at a time where my business had taken a dip. But I just knew that it was the right thing to do. I just felt that pull in me so strongly. And I knew that if I didn't do it at the time, it would just not go away. Or it would go away, but I would stay in the same place. And I never want to stay in the same place if it's a place that makes me feel stuck. Because if you feel stuck, it's your responsibility to get unstuck. It's your responsibility to do something about it. And the other big investment that I made that was really stretchy for me at the time was the investment in a business mentor. I interviewed her as well for this podcast and this season. I will link that below as well. And that was the biggest investment that I'd made up until that point. And that was in 2021. But I had known that I wanted support that was comprehensive. I wanted a comprehensive program. I had no other job at the time. I was working part-time or freelance, but that didn't even cover my bills. So I was completely living off my savings, and they were dwindling. But I still made this investment because I just could not stay where I was. With any of these, I didn't really know whether it would pay off. When it comes to coaching and when it comes to investments, I've definitely also made a few that did not pay off, That's important to say too. It doesn't mean that when you invest in yourself, it's always going to pay off. Just like when you take a risk and you take a leap of faith, you don't know whether it's going to pay off. But one thing that I always knew was that if I don't do anything, nothing is going to change. That's a guarantee that I have. And if I feel a pull towards something, just like with the move, there's a reason for it. So now the question I ask myself when it comes to making an investment in myself, I go internally into the reality where I've already invested. I've already chosen to invest. It's already done. The money is gone. I can't get it back. I'm in the program or whatever it is. How do I feel? Can I relax into the container? Am I excited to be there now? Do I want this help or not? And sometimes I see it doesn't actually excite me. So making that investment is not the right call. But other times I see once I take the fear of investing the money or the fear of consequences out of the picture and it's already done, I see it does excite me. And the only thing that was holding me back from taking action was fear. Fear of investing money, fear of investing energy, fear of committing, fear of it not working out. And then the third leap of faith without backup that I took was starting my coaching business. And sometimes people ask me about that. Sometimes people ask me how I started my coaching business. And because the coaching industry has gotten so popular, I think it's also important to say, if someone is asking me that from the place of thinking, oh, maybe I could do this because this looks easy, or, you know, I want to help people, like, let me do this and I can make some money. It's not really the right intention or the right approach. You know, I'm a bit cautious with that. But first things first, I want to say that starting a coaching business was not something that I desired to do. It was, I want to say, a divine intervention. I actually speak a little bit more about this in an interview that already went live for this season as well with Nina, because when I interviewed her, we kind of discovered that we had a very similar career pivot story. Yeah, so check out that interview. I'm going to link it as well, but I'm going to link it in the show notes. Everything's going to be in the show notes. But yeah, it wasn't something that I sought out. I didn't seek to become a coach. However, once it was presented to me and it kind of organically was something that people began asking me for, then I was in front of the decision whether to go all in or not. So basically what had happened was that I then lost my job because that was during COVID and I had worked in the travel industry. I had had a marketing position for a travel company. But I will say, even before all that happened, I had already begun questioning whether the work I was doing was really what I wanted to do long term. So much so that I had already, strangely enough, started doing trainings in counseling and breath work and different modalities just because it helped me. So I thought, this is just something for me. This is for my personal toolbox. And then I got made redundant and I got a decent severance package from the company where I worked, which was enough to keep me going for a couple months at least, maybe more if I was frugal. I don't actually remember the specifics, but that was obviously a unique position, right? If you're being made redundant and you get some money as a consequence of that, you know, you do have a bit of a buffer that maybe otherwise you wouldn't have if you quit your job. But at first, I panicked and I applied for a bunch of different jobs. And because I also didn't know what I wanted to do. Like, I didn't know that I could start a coaching business really, or I didn't know if I wanted to do that. And I even got one job offer that was double the salary that I'd had at my old company. It would have been a huge jump for me. Definitely better money than starting your business where you currently have no money coming in and just this one person asked you for one coaching call. But I just felt like it's now or never. You know, when am I ever going to be in a position again where I have a few months of a buffer? So even though I'm taking a risk here, isn't the real risk going back to what is known and what ultimately did not make me happy? Isn't the real risk for things to stay as they've always been? You know, we're always taking risks with any decision we make or don't make. And it's just for you to decide, what risks am I willing to take? And where do I want to move? Because I only have this one life. And this one life is really fucking short. So why not do what you want to do? Don't get me wrong though, it was hard, right? I want to say that too. It was hard. And it would have been so much easier to say, you know what, I'm going to take this job with this huge pay rise that is safe. But it was hard because I didn't do that. It was extra hard. I worked 3 jobs at the beginning. I was genuinely working 7 days a week. I was getting up at 5 a.m. every morning and I was going to bed, I think at 9 p.m. every night. And I didn't do anything except work all day, every day. I did not have a social life. Yeah, if I wanted to take care of myself and sleep enough, that was what I had to do. And it took 1.5 years until I felt confident to quit those other jobs and go full-time in my coaching business. But I'm so glad I did, because I wouldn't be sitting here if I didn't, and my life would be a lot more gray. And there's nothing wrong, by the way, with not having a business. We don't all have the same path or desires. For you, your desire might be something different. But know that just because you pursue something also doesn't mean that it's going to be easy or it's going to be handed to you. When it comes to taking a leap of faith or making a decision that accelerates you or that is a bit of a risk, right? Just like anything, just like not making the decision would be a risk. I think there's this illusion sometimes of waiting until you're ready. But when you feel the pull, you're ready. Everything else after that is just noise. Often when you make a decision, when you take a leap, you look back and you say, I already wanted that 7 months ago. I just didn't do it because I was scared. So you're ready when you choose that, you are. Because you're not just going to wake up one day and feel safe taking a leap or making a decision that is new or unfamiliar to you. It's always going to feel scary. And the analogy that I like to use, and I actually mentioned it when I interviewed Haley, my business mentor, for this season. You know the Fool card in tarot? I always think about this image when the Fool is standing on that edge of the cliff and just walking and just with the head up and, you know, he's looking up. He's not even looking at where he's walking. He's just naively taking the first steps. And we know the journey isn't going to be easy, but that's not what he's thinking about. And what often happens is that we start this journey, or we want to start this journey, and we get to that edge and we look down and we say, oh no, I better go back. And that's what your brain will then do. It's going to try and pull you back. Fear is going to kick in, and it's your decision whether you then still take that leap or whether you do walk back. But whatever your decision is, you have to make it consciously, because you cannot wait for fear to go away. And honestly, if you ask me, I say, don't keep a plan B open. Can you let the fear exist, but have faith anyway? Can you do that? That's my advice to you. I'm Lorena. This was Identity Evolution. Please come and find me on Instagram at Lorena Schuth and share your key takeaway from this episode with me and maybe what leap of faith you are choosing to take. You'll also find links and resources in the show notes, plus my self-concept coaching program, Recreate Yourself, if you are feeling ready for your own identity shift. And if this episode stirred something in you, then make sure you subscribe and leave a quick review wherever you're listening. It really helps more people find these stories of self-reinvention. So I will see you next time.